Hey everyone, welcome to Hub and Spoke, a storytelling platform produced by the Hurt Hub for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Davidson College. I'm your host, Liz Smith Brigham, Davidson class of 2004, and director at the Hurt Hub at Davidson. We'll feature Davidson alumni and other members of our community who've started their own businesses, who are investing in innovation, and who are at the leading edge of solving the world's most pressing challenges. Through these conversations, we hope to inspire and connect the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs leading lives of leadership and service. Thank you to the Entrepreneurship Club for co-sponsoring this event with us tonight. This marks the return of a series called Hub and Spoke, which we actually started in the midst of COVID in 2020 and early 2021, when we weren't able to do any in-person programming here at the Hurt Hub. And it was a wonderful way for us to share the stories of our community. We call it the faces of entrepreneurship that we serve. Faculty, alumni, co-working members, entrepreneurs, students, and staff. So it's really my pleasure to have Scott back here today. We worked at Morningstar together, and we were talking a little bit earlier today about the importance of networking and how networking is sometimes a dirty word. And I like to think about it more as building your team. And Scott added your life team.
Life team, yeah.
So you never know how you're going to wind back up around, 8 years later. Scott posted on LinkedIn maybe 4 or 5 months ago, something like that, saying he was looking for student interns for his company, which I was aware of. And we had talked about a couple years ago when he was starting it up. And I said, well, my gosh, we have a wonderful pool of students that would be willing and able to help you. I think one of those students is in the audience tonight. Wonderful. And so again, as you think about building your team and staying connected to those individuals, you never know what opportunities might come for yourself or for others down the road. And so Scott hired 4 Davidson students through our student consulting program and was so gracious enough to accept my invitation to come speak tonight.
Well, thanks, Liz. It's really great to be here. And I do want to say it was a great experience working with the Davidson students that were interns. They're published now. I think there's one more left to publish. But they did. I mean, it was such an amazing job. Just a great experience, very self-directed. Didn't require a ton of my editing. That's probably the biggest thing. Everybody hates that. So really, really great that they were able to really run with it and show the initiatives. And I'd actually just add to that, one of my co-founders was a fraternity brother of mine from the U of I, and so folks sitting here right next to you, we went totally different paths for a long time. And then 25 years later, hooked back up to start IL Data.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to get into that. And, the purpose of these discussions is really to remove the social media veneer as much as you're willing, because this is being recorded. So as much as you're willing and able to share.
I don't buy into it, so that'll be easy.
But to really put forth a realistic story of what it takes to move from a very successful career in more of a corporate environment and take that leap into entrepreneurship. So I would love to just start there, setting the tone. Scott, if you would, give us a little bit of background about your career arc. And if you would spend some time highlighting the decision points that you made along the way, that would be great to illustrate a little bit more, bring your bio to life.
Okay. Well, actually, my early career, I spent a lot of time in Charlotte, actually. I started at the Bank of America, and I was working in Charlotte like a week a month for about a year or so. But we're going to fast forward past all that. I ended up banking. I will say I've retired 3 times in life. So to inspire you, I define retiring as I quit a job without having another job lined up with the intent of just taking some time off and looking for it. And that is scary in a way, but I don't know. I didn't feel it was that scary. I always found it was pretty hard for me to think of the next thing I wanted to do when I was super busy doing this other thing at the time. And every one of those moments was a pretty significant, I think, kind of career pivot. So I left banking and I retired the first time, and I backpacked around Europe for a year. And I could do that because I did not have wife, kids, or a mortgage at that point in time. And so that's a good time to think about that when you don't have those liabilities. And then when assets, but is she going to get the recording?
Yeah.
But then I joined Morningstar and, spent 18 years at Morningstar with a couple of pretty significant pivots, along the way inside of there. And then when I started at Morningstar, it was 250 people in Chicago, 95 million in revenue. Like it wasn't much further than a startup itself. We thought of ourselves as a startup, a $95 million revenue startup, and it was a very entrepreneurial attitude. In fact, one of the core corporate mantras that they had was entrepreneurial spirit. That was something that was really fostered at Morningstar. So that was appealing. Fast forward 18 years and Morningstar is now 2 billion in revenue and 10,000 employees. And I was managing a P&L that was $675 million in and of itself. And, it was a great ride. But, I stopped and thought a little bit about what I missed, and what I really liked was all the little things that we did along the way to get from 95 million to the 2 billion. And so that was, what really kind of inspired, it wasn't like I decided to change per se, but I felt that like I didn't belong anymore, that it was like time to move on, that I'd kind of done, what I wanted to do. And that I was looking for that more, let's build something from nothing kind of challenge. And so that's what led me to depart Morningstar. And pause there for a second.
We'll get there. One thing, and I know because Victoria in our prep conversation had this to ask around more about your personal life. And I know you shared with us earlier that you are a first gen student. There are a number of students in the audience and others in our community that are first gen. I'm just kind of curious a little bit about your kind of upbringing or things that you felt like, did that give you more of an appetite for risk or doing other things?
Weirdly, no. And it was great being around Morningstar because there were a lot of great founders there. Joe Mansueto, the founder, and then a lot of the core people when it was like just in his apartment and came out. And I remember I was in my late 20s, mid 20s when I was there, and I was like, God, there's no way I could do that. Like I could never do that. And, part of that, my upbringing, I grew up on the south side of Chicago in a fairly working class family. My parents both worked for the phone company their whole lives. And I was the first person in my family to go to college. I was the first person to leave the country without a war on the other side of the trip waiting for me. So I can't say like, no one else has left the US. They did. It wasn't great what was going on the other side. And so I would say, actually, I was super risk averse. I did not ever want to have to worry about money again. And so for a lot of my corporate life, I really enjoyed the safety that the corporate net provided. And I'm not ashamed to admit that. Like that was what I wanted and what I needed. And then as we, move forward into the future, when I really felt like that was secure for me, and this is my own personal journey, I felt that I could take the leap. Like I was comfortable enough to go. It also helps that I was one of the foremost leading thought leaders around retirement. So I actually have I know a lot about what it actually takes to retire, and it's not what they tell you. I was able to really kind of manage that, take stock of, what all that hard work had gotten me. And my wife worked the entire time and said, look, we can do this. Like, this is something that we can do at this point in time, even with kids still in high school and still have to go to college. And so it was a good time to go. But no, I am not, when you take that social media veneer off, I am not some risk seeking, we got to get out there. I remember there was a startup that is kind of tangential to what we do. And I was snooping, I was lurking on the guy's LinkedIn, taking a look, and it was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. He was like, I got fired from Facebook for daring to work on a Saturday. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, are you serious? Like, I'm a ninja, I'm a deal ninja. I'm like, oh my Lord. So I did it. I was like, how about you build a business,
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about building a business. We'll pivot from there. And I think there's a lot of this sort of celebritization of the founder, celebritization of Silicon Valley, and how much did you raise and whatnot. Can you explain a little bit about more of your philosophy of building a sustainable business and what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, building a sustainable business is hard work, and I don't want to sugarcoat it. Like getting, 10 people to buy something from you when 10 other people have never bought it before is like one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, to be honest. Yeah, I think a lot of that, just to talk about what's wrong with some of the celebritization, and I've run into plenty of founders who spend so much time thinking about raising capital, but they don't actually think about building the business, right? And you got to build the business, and you build the business, with rolling up your sleeves, getting in and doing the work, understanding the customers, really getting in their shoes and not this like razzle dazzle. And there is this like world, this is where like networking we were talking about like goes wrong, where you're just in this like echo chamber of people pumping each other up. But the only one of the mindsets you need as an entrepreneur, as a founder, is the only person whose opinion matters is the person who will actually buy it from you. And all other opinions are nice, but they're not money, right? And I cannot stress that enough. And that is the most important thing, right? Is like that person who is, I'd show it to friends, say, oh, that's a great idea. And oh yeah, you can do all this stuff. I'm like, that's cool, but you're not going to buy it. And you're not a buyer, right? And so I'm going to take that and I'll stick it in my like feel good box. But that is not information about the business. And it's easy to get distracted with the capital raise. It's easy to get distracted with all that. But at the end of the day, if you don't build a business that will cash flow, then you have done nothing, right? And you are just kind of in this Ponzi scheme of sorts, especially in Silicon Valley, and I can tell you that that's what I've observed is just money passing around other money. I mean, there's no business at the end of the day. And then when the Ukraine war broke out, which was right as I was thinking of starting Isle Data, I will tell you what happened in the private equity venture capital markets. Everybody put their hands in their pockets and there was no money to be had because all of these portfolio companies that they had invested in were not generating cash flow. And were not really sustainable businesses. And so they were spending all this time triaging all these weird investments and, 2 pages, I'm going to use AI to save pandas, here's $10 million. And those ideas just got flushed, right? And so I think the world's kind of changed with that. But, you build a sustainable business by focusing on the customer first, focusing on your product second, right? And then financing comes as a symptom of the process, not as the goal of the process.
Yeah, I like to say that the best source of funding is revenue.
It is, absolutely.
Let's start from the baseline. Tell us about Isle Data. What was the spark for you?
Sure.
And break it down because I know everybody's coming from different backgrounds of understanding what a B2B business is, data business is. So just kind of start from the very beginning and we'll build from there.
I was at Morningstar. Morningstar is a business-to-business service. Even though investors were at the core, the way Morningstar made its money was selling to financial advisors and asset managers in general. And Morningstar is a complicated company, but that was the core business we were at. And as I was, thinking about what I wanted to do with life, and as Morningstar had kind of run its course for me, I said to him, well, one, actually, let me back up. The seed came from, there's a Dr. Burns. Dr. Burns is my younger sister, Dr. Catherine Burns, and she has a PhD in academic administration, education leadership. She's going to kill me. I got that wrong. So PhD in education leadership. And she works at a non-for-profit that trains charter school principals around the country, some of the tougher neighborhoods. Very mission-driven person, and really accelerated. She was a school principal at a charter school in Chicago when she was 27 years old. And very go-getter in that space. And her and I were on a flight together. We were going to see some family and she was talking about her business and how she was trying to grow. Not-for-profits doesn't mean no profit, right? It doesn't mean no revenue. So she was thinking like a business person and how to grow her business. And I started asking her questions. I said, well, I asked a school district official back then, I thought it was principals, but turns out it's all at the district level, at least in Illinois, how you're doing, like, how would they answer that question? Like substantively, like with data. And the short answer is not super well. And I just thought it was really weird that, we're here at Morningstar and you could put $300, say, into a 401k, which is not a ton of money in the grand scheme of 401ks. And Morningstar would give you 9 pages of data analytics and graphics and tell you more about that $300 and how it was invested. But you look at school districts, and some of these school districts, there's the big ones like Chicago Public Schools or New York schools, but there's lots of school districts. Some of the suburban school districts in Illinois are $500 million revenue businesses, and nobody could tell you anything about it. It wasn't because the data wasn't there, which I eventually, as I found, but I just found that really curious. And I've always also kind of had a belief in something that I've been able to blend together in life of a mission-based, profitable business, and school administrators, when you meet them, they're very mission-driven people. They're good people. They're trying hard. But I've always had this saying, if you don't take care of the business, you can't do the mission, right? And so I realized the goal, we stayed away from test scores and other things that I couldn't even try to comprehend. But I saw that the real need was understanding school district spending, which, in the state of Illinois, 60% of our property taxes go into school districts. We should look at these like a business, and not to run them like for profit, but just to be able to have the same data and analytics to be able to make decisions and serve them.
So now tell us a little bit more about who your customer is. You talked about obsession with, customer centricity, and that's the most important. Walk us through that.
Yeah. So it's really cool that I just talked all about school districts. They're actually not the customer, turns out. Well, not the primary customer. As we were looking around for the data, I couldn't figure out. Well, I found a lot of good stuff, and we could do a lot of neat things. And this will be a theme, that neat is cool, but neat isn't a product that people will pay for per se. And then I found this one kind of data, and it was vendor data. And it turns out that all Illinois school districts, and this is true for lots of states, lots of municipalities around the world, around the US, I should say, have to publish every vendor they do business with and publish the dollars to the penny. And they've been doing it for like 80 years in the newspapers. And nobody thought to database that, which I thought was extra weird. So in order to, we do work with school districts. So I didn't want to put them away, but our primary customer are actually the product and service providers that are selling into school districts. And, they did not really have a ton of insight into what was going on in these huge companies, which again was weird because it was actually all out there in the public, right? And I joked, and you and I, we shared customers. I said, well, like, hey, Liz, when you were running Morningstar Direct, if I came to you and said, hey, I can tell you everybody Merrill Lynch and BlackRock's doing business with and how much they're paying them, what would that be worth to you?
$10,000.
Oh. I would. My joke is infinity, but okay. Or at least, 20% of what I thought I could make off of it. But that kind of intel is super critical. And so, by finding that data, harvesting that data, that allowed us to really then kind of form the company idea and work with the vendors and the service providers as more of a business intelligence service. But the school districts use this as well. They use this for comparative analytics amongst themselves. And they use it for vendor comparisons. We actually have a school district that put out an RFP for flooring, and they had the lowest bidder came in and they said, do you work with other school districts in Illinois? And they're like, oh yeah, tons of them. And they went into aisle data, and the answer is they did not. So that was an easy decision. And I guess that's the other thing I'd say about a school. You're all students, so you're all thinking of like the classroom. Like I just want to say, like, a school is like a town, right? It takes a lot to run a school, right? Do you know how many signs are in a school? The janitors don't have a sign making machine in the back, right? Like somebody sold them those signs, right? Gym floors, the curriculum, the payroll software. School is a massive enterprise, like a town. And so that's actually probably one of the hardest things for when I tell people about what aisle data does, is I think they're like, well, how many textbooks, can chalk and whatever, chalk, like how old am I? Smart boards, whatever, can there be? I'm like, no, like a school is like, like a school is four walls holding up really expensive roofs surrounded by equally expensive parking lots. That's what the data will tell you. So
I know a thing or two about expensive parking lots.
Well,
That's a good conversation. Okay. So talk to us more about, when you were initially thinking about the idea, and you were pitching it, and you were having these initial discovery conversations. And again, it sounded like not too many people were familiar with this.
Yeah.
How did you educate people on why this is an urgent, pervasive problem that somebody should be willing to pay for?
Yeah, well, I'll go back when the idea was, like a grain of sand still. I was talking actually with John Gabbert, who's another founder. He founded PitchBook, which Morningstar had acquired, and I'd gotten to know John over the years, working together. And, as I was leaving Morningstar, we were at, I think it was like a holiday party, and I was just pitching him the idea because he was a founder I really respected, and he had the world's largest database on venture capital and companies. So he's a good guy to talk to, or he had built that. And I said, yeah, John, like, here's what I'm thinking: school districts, and they need financial transparency, and they need help. And he just kept saying to me, why would someone pay for that? And I would like, well, because like they don't know. He's like, yeah, that's cool. Like, why would someone pay for that? And I was like, well, because they don't know, and now they're going to be able. Why would someone pay for that? And that question, and I've repeated it purposefully, because that question haunted me through the first year of founding Aisle Data. And actually, it's what led to me finding the vendor data. Was because I found a bunch of stuff that was neat. I found a lot of stuff we could do a lot of cool things with. But that question haunted me: why would someone pay for this, and how much? And as entrepreneurs, that is, I think, one of the most important questions you have to keep in mind all times. What is it you're going to build, that is going to help somebody part with their money to solve something. And there's a lot that can go into that, but it is the most critical question. And you'll read a lot of stuff that says, find a customer problem and solve it. I want to tell you, in the real world, there are lots of problems, annoy people, but never annoy them enough that they will pay to deal with it, right? There are lots of save time and money things you can do, but they won't save enough time and enough money for somebody to pay for it, right? And so you have to be hyper focused on that. You will eventually have to take a leap of faith, because you never know, truly never know if someone will pay for it till someone actually does pay for it. Turns out. Our head of sales, who we brought on in August, he likes to say buyers are liars. That's one of his favorite sayings. And he's not wrong. There's a lot of people who want to be very polite or want to tell you, oh, it's great. And then you say, great. All right, it's $5,000. And they're like, whoa, yeah, well, maybe not for me, maybe somebody else. So, really have that discipline and just stay focused. Even going back to the where founders put their attention, like the attention has to be on revenue. Like it has to be. You have to get to revenue as quickly as you can. So.
And how are some of those, maybe talk through a couple of those first sales or your very first sale? Yeah, what did that look like? What was the path?
My very first sale was to a roofing company, actually, believe it or not, which you wouldn't. Education Data, our first client, was a huge commercial roofer. And that's why I use that example all the time, four walls, but like a roofing project at a large Chicago suburban school district is like a $9 million project, right? This is big money. And so having intelligence, but the way it works, let's talk about this. Might be too much detail, but the way it works, and this is part of getting to know the customers and then understanding the school buying cycle. And I've had to learn lots of different industries. I don't know anything about roofing, but now I feel pretty expert on how it works. Is that the school districts would keep 3 or 4 roofers warm through they called them the leak calls, right? So roof spring leaks, and you got to call somebody, and we can actually see it in our data. You see these little $30,000, $40,000 jobs. And this roofer, our roofing client, was flying blind as to who the district was actually keeping warm. Who was their competition? Like, where were they? Were they growing? When they first came on, they're like, oh yeah, we're the best. We do all the roofs. Everybody loves us. I was like, actually, you're number 7, and you used to be number 5, and you're moving down the list. And they're like, oh my God, and so, being able to help someone in that marketplace just kind of understand what's the total addressable market. I couldn't even answer the question. How much roofing gets done in the state of Illinois in a year? Couldn't even answer that question, right? Like, actually, Liz is the one who taught me about TAM, SAM, SOM. I'm a reformed analyst who took over a business, and she's like, what's your TAM? I'm like, what?
Total addressable market.
Sorry, yeah, total addressable market. Like, that's important, like how much money is there to be made? Like, that's important, and so to be able to answer those questions. So, our first client came on, they were not very data savvy. They were living very much by the Rolodex world. That was another problem that they had. They couldn't keep their Rolodex up to date. So we started collecting district contact data. But that's, that is really what happened. So our first client was a roofer, and our second client was an accounting firm. And our third client was a cafeteria company. Still haven't touched the classroom yet, right? We're working there.
So where were those moments of needing to change and needing to pivot?
Finding that data was like my eureka moment. It was like, aha, like I know people will pay for this, or they should. Well, let's just say my confidence was a lot higher in that. Like, this wasn't like a nice to have. It wasn't like, oh, neat. It wasn't like, oh, this will make my presentations better. This was like real actionable data that, from my background of running a business and, having to have sales teams and product marketers, I was like, oh man, wow. Like, where has this been this whole time? And in fact, it was like some of the biggest problem I have is like the education of it. That people are just like, can't even believe that data exists. They're like, you know my entire book of business. I'm like, not only do I know your entire book of business, I know all your competitors' book of business, or I know all the people that influence whether you get selected or not their book of business, which is also something that really kind of happens in the education space. And so finding that data was pretty critical. And then making that pivot away from the district as the primary buyer to the vendor as the primary buyer. I don't even know that I mentioned vendor at all, actually. Maybe a little bit. I don't know. Part of the pivot was, I got out into the space. I was an industry changer, right? Like, and I would say, like, in my career, there was Scott, the data and research guy, and Scott, the wealth and investing guy. And I'd been using those two people together, but you don't have to do that, right? Like if you build skills in life as you go forward in your careers, you should think about that. You're going to have your industry expertise, but then you're going to have like your skill expertise. And when you build up enough of that skill expertise, you can plug and play it, but you do have to reinvest in then kind of understanding that industry. And so as I got out in the industry, I found that there were all sorts of PhDs and all sorts of people trying to solve, what's with test scores and things like that. And I was nowhere near qualified. And frankly, as a career benchmarker and data analyst, I thought it was almost an impossible journey because none of those people could agree on what success looked like. So that's a side editorial. So any of you who are thinking you want to go solve education's ills, I would tell you that there's a lot of focus on the tails and nobody's really looking at the middle and nobody can agree on what success is, which makes it impossible to benchmark and analyze and maybe succeed. But we'll keep the faith. And so once we had that was another pivot point, was like, all right, well, this is a world that's covered. There's a lot of expertise that we don't have. We're not going to build. We would be me tooing it and then kind of fighting an uphill battle. But this vendor space was just wide open. It was so green. It was truly a eureka moment when I found it. Like when I found it, I was like, oh.
I'm really interested in the team and how you think about finding your co-founders, or how you thought about finding your co-founders, how you brought on this new salesperson, what the future looks like. Talk a little bit about building out the team.
I'm very relationship driven, and finding people, and especially if you're going to do a startup and bootstrap it like we did, like this is like a marriage. We are married, like me and my co-founders. So before my wife and I got married, we bought a condo together. We had a mortgage, and then on the wedding day, my wife's like, "Are you nervous?" And I'm like, "Well, not really, because to be honest, it'd be harder for me to get out of that mortgage than this marriage. As far as I'm concerned, we got married a long time ago. I'm a finance guy. Sorry. What can I say? Let's take a little of the romance out of it. I do speak the truth. And so, when you're finding your partners, they have to be people you trust implicitly. They have to be people that you can, work with. They don't have to be the same person, and they shouldn't. One of the other things I would say is, as a founder, is like really understand what you enjoy, like what part of the business part you enjoy. Actually, we were the young gentleman with the shoes.
Yes,
Jakari. So I stopped by the event early, and Jakari was there, with the shoes and everything. And I said, well, what the question I wanted to ask him is like, do you enjoy being the artist or do you want to be the business person? And they are kind of different things. And actually on the IL data team, I am like the artist. I'm the research guy. And one of my partners, he's the CFO. He was the CFO of a data company that ended up selling. And so he had the good CFO lever package. And he handles the business stuff. He sets up the LLCs. He gets the W-9. He handles the payroll and everything. And it's all stuff I could do. I don't enjoy it. It's not what I want to do. I could research payroll systems and, spend 3 weeks of my life doing that and probably be 50-50 on getting it right, when he's done it a million times and he can just do it. And then my other partner, Jenica, she's the data guru. She understands Amazon Web Services and coding in SQL and all of the things that it takes behind the scenes to make this happen. Which again, could I have learned it? Sure. Do I enjoy it? No. Does she? Yes. And so, bringing all these different skill sets together. And so that's from a skill set, but then also from a personality standpoint, I'm the optimist, believe it or not. And I will tell you, when you're a founder, your job is optimist. All right. A million people are going to tell you your idea sucks. Your job is that's great. I think we'll do fine. Right. Rob is a business guy. He's just show me the revenue. That's the CFO partner. That's chief financial officer. I don't have to do that one. And then Jenica is she's very operations based, operations trained. And, she's like the de-risk everything person. She's kind of the conservative person in the group. And that's because when you go through an entire career of operations training and product building, it is a lot of risk mitigation, and she came up through FactSet, which is a financial data and trading platform where risk mitigation was big. And so, we've got the optimist, we've got the down the middle, business, and then we've got someone who's a little more conservative, and that helps, you can't be afraid of that. The disagreement makes for better decisions, makes for better processes. So yeah, I could have found my 3 buddies who were yeah, Scott, this is awesome. And do whatever you want, this is great. That would probably not would have worked. It would have been more of a crapshoot. And then bringing on the salesperson, we looked around, and actually our chief revenue officer worked for the CFO at the data company primary.
Hmm.
So, I just think when you're starting small, and literally every dollar that goes into aisle comes out of my checking account, right? Like you gotta have people that that you trust. Going through interview processes is not the same as a lifetime of relationship.
How did you make the call to bring on that head of sales? Because presumably you were doing the
I was,
majority of the
yeah.
sales calls before. So what was the tipping point where you said, I need another person?
I wasn't very good at it. So that's important. I mean, I was good. I would say, so when you're a founder, you're in sales. So just understand that. Like you're in sales. If you say, oh, I'm not good at sales, then I would tell you don't be a founder, right? Or find a partner who's extremely good at sales and make sure that they handle that, right? Like build your team. But you're in sales. You're selling all the time, whether it's to customers or investors or employees that you're going to, like, hey, we're a startup. We're not really paying salaries yet, but this is a real good idea. Come on board. Those are fun talks. So like, yeah, you're really selling the vision like all the time. But there is a difference between being salesy and being an actual professional salesperson, right? And that is important. I'll be honest, it wasn't something I truly appreciated even when we were at Morningstar. I don't think about what it takes to pursue a customer, close a customer, build that rapport, build the relationship. And our salesperson, Don, has a great rapport. He's really a sales manager. He was running a sales team of 200 people, but he said, look, this is probably my last rodeo too. So I want to get in and do something, and grow it. And I like you guys and I like the idea. And so don't be dismissive of that, and I think that there's a lot of it. I can tell this is a room of very smart people. And, it's easy to be kind of dismissive of, I went to a big state school and, there was the guy the business degree who slept all day, got straight C's and is now living in some, $2 million house in the Chicago suburbs as a super successful salesperson, right? Like it is a totally different skill set and not one to be diminished, right? Like again, revenue. So that tipping point was the product was set. We had gotten traction. People were buying, even given my limited sales skills. And it was like, what we need is more revenue. We need more revenue. We don't need to put any more money into product. I've been sitting on the state of Indiana data now for a year and a half. For a year and a half, that's the discipline because that would be a distraction. Get the one state right, get the revenue in, prove it out, and then you can move on from a product standpoint to the next thing. So it's hard because like, I want to go, I want to build, I want to do this, but we have to stay on top of revenue.
How do you build in that discipline to not get distracted and to sit on that data and to know there's something there? You've already proven product market fit in the state of Illinois to a certain extent. How did you build that?
Not to quote the guy, he's really becoming the star. John Gabbard also gave me my other favorite piece of advice. And that's something that he ran all of when he was starting PitchBook. So, this is part of like building your life team. It's also like wisdom generally comes from experience, but if you're really listening to people and watching people, you can learn off of their wisdom, right? And John had this saying all the time, and this is how he kept PitchBook tight, was focus on focus. Focus on focus. And so that is what we do. And I say it a million times, focus on focus. Every time, even one of my partners, even me, it's like, oh, well, maybe we could do Indiana, or maybe we should look at park districts, or maybe, we should build a marketplace where buyers and stuff. I'm like, great. How about we focus on focus? So we're going to do one state right. We're going to stay in one vertical right. We're going to grow revenue. We're going to prove it. We are going to be focused on focus. And that's what we're going to do. And when people say, oh, I wish you had more states, I'm like, that's great. Someday we will. But right now we have this state. And if it's not enough for you, that's okay. That's fine. I'll see you when we have the rest of it. But really, really be focused. And I'm not naturally a super focused person. I love all sorts of great ideas. I'm moved around a lot of jobs, even inside of Morningstar and everything. And so built it in. Again, having that team, Jenica, being the more conservative is like, I don't know. I think we should sit back. When she's not ready to go, I got to stop. I got to listen. You have to listen to your team and think about it. But focus on focus for sure. Credit to John for that.
Wonderful. Well, we are at about 6:40. So if anybody has questions, please feel free to walk up to the mic. And this is, ask Scott anything hours. So sure. Nothing is off base.
This question is from David. I'm really intrigued by the story of your logo generation, and I wondered, where does the name Aisle Data come from?
Now I'm really intrigued.
enjoyed the story of your logo generation.
Yes.
And I actually went behind it. Where did the name come
Oh, the name. So the name comes from the John Donne poem, "For no man is an island." For no man is an isle into himself, where nobody's separate from the main. And the idea for that is that, nothing, what connects us all is data, right? And so data is the steel thread that connects everything. And so I've always liked that poem. That's really, if you actually want to read the poem, I think we had it on a slide, believe it or not. For no man is an island. By the way, that poem ends with a more famous line: "Do not ask for whom the bell tolls." You guys, does that ring a bell? The bell tolls for thee. But that was the idea, is that, and actually in the logo, it is like an isle. It's like an island and a main kind of come together. They're separate, but they're together.
As a follow-up to that, you said that what you're doing is allowing schools to focus more on the point of education. Could you speak more on that?
I think that's, like, to go back to the business and the mission, the way I think about it and the way I pitch it to school districts, one, when it comes to the vendor side, so they use it for two different reasons. But from the vendor side, if we can help a school district save $80,000 because they did a better job bidding out this $9 million roof project, $80,000 is a social worker, right? And that's how I try to explain it to them. Like, these costs are all trade-offs. These budgets are locked. Like, a school district cannot go generate more revenue per se, right? They have their taxable base, and that's the money that comes in. And so they have this really tough job of constantly having to balance this, like, fixed budget. And so for them, saving cost, not just time and money, but actually being able to save cost at $80,000, at $200,000, like, it really does add to their ability to put more into the classroom, put more into the social emotional well-being. And that's how I look at it from a mission standpoint. Like it's not, they're not going to pay out a bigger dividend because they saved money. They're going to invest it in the kids.
Have any of your analysts been able to look at that classroom efficacy?
Yeah, so we, like I said, we kind of stay away from the testing side, but I will say a lot of the classroom efficacy stuff that is out there is missing a super critical ingredient. If you're looking at the return on investment or the ROI of anything, there's no the investment, but we know what it was. We can tell you, if you added this tutoring service for this cost, or you saw this other district add it, what happened on the test score side. We leave that for somebody else to draw that conclusion, but we are providing the investment at a molecular level, right? So people could parse that and look at it. No, thank you.
Having talked about your mission to assist school districts, what opportunities and challenges do you see in the next few years for your business?
Every state's a little different, which is exciting and terrifying all at the same time. But in Illinois, the school districts, varying sizes, but you have this assistant superintendent of business, CFO of the district. And that's usually our primary client. And actually, just to be clear, about 20% of our business currently, we are a small startup, but about 20% of our business is with school districts, right? And so, there are other software platforms for really, really large districts that do a lot of forecasting software and comparative analytics, and that's great. And they cost like $35,000 a year. We sell to school districts for $1,500 a year, and they can, have this comparative analytics, and it's amazing. A lot of them are flying blind. I will tell you, you ask about efficacy. Maybe a different way I'd answer that question is when you start to spread some of the decisions that they're making, and there's 854 school districts in Illinois, say the decision to outsource transportation or insource transportation. I've never seen anything like it. They literally, you just measure percent in salaries versus purchase services, and it is like a tautological, that means, in order, 96% salaries, 95, 94, 93, 92, 91. There's no bunching, there's no measurement. And that, in my entire experience in data, when something is not measured, that's what you get. You get chaos. You get like no actual rhyme or reason to things. And I would ask district officials, like, oh, how do you decide whether you want to self-operate your bus or outsource? And they're just like, well, I don't know. Somebody decided years ago. And like, they don't even know. And they're just kind of flying blind. Don't get me wrong. I do think there's a huge opportunity for us to work with districts. But part of this discipline, part of this focus, I have to have a viable business. And in order to do that, the vendors are the bigger opportunity. And some of that is just math, right? There's 854 school districts. There are 40,000 vendors in any given year working with school districts. in Illinois, right? And a lot of them are regional because a lot of it's construction or janitorial services and things like that. And some of them are national, like curriculum and textbooks and things. And that's part of that discipline. If we don't get the business stood up, then we can't help anybody.
The data, it seems like there's lots of data you guys are looking at. So what do you know exactly what to look for? How do you know what's potentially valuable to the vendors? And where are you looking?
Yeah, so a lot of this data comes through public filings. In Illinois, it was good happenstance that I happen to live in Illinois. And Illinois is actually probably Illinois and Massachusetts are probably the two best at transparency around school districts. It's probably because Illinois and Massachusetts have amazing histories of corruption and nepotism, which is why there's all this transparency. So, yay. That's, if you're wondering why they have to publish this stuff, it's because they kept picking their cousins and their brothers and aunts and whatnot to do all these services. So that is what caused all that transparency. So, you're fishing around on these sites, and a lot of them are Illinois State Board of Education sites or county records, pushing through, again, like the contact data. We go through 854 school district websites and hand scrape 9 titles. So, I think there's a question of like, how do you find the data? I spend a lot of time just in my office searching around, looking for something. And, again, we didn't really get to talk about this, but this is where the empathy, Liz has written a great post about empathy. This is one of her passions. You should talk to her about it. But like empathy is not, oh, I feel sorry your dog got run over. Empathy is about the ability to get in a customer's shoes and see the world through their eyes and understand what their sale process is and understand what their success is going to look like. Because then once you do that, then that starts to bring, the mosaic of all this data together. And it isn't just that we found the data, it's how we stitched it together that makes it actionable, for folks who are in that job and trying to pursue this business, or a school district who's trying to compare themselves to other districts. You have to get in their shoes. You have to look at it. A little off topic, but actually I want to get this piece of advice out. Like one of the best things I did as I was moving from a research job into a business job and moving into more sales type stuff is one of the exercises I like to do is think about the customer's year-end review, right? So when you're in business to business, you're selling to somebody who works at a business, they're going to have a year-end review, just like you're going to have a year-end review. And think about their year-end review and think about what they're going to be asked about and where they succeeded. And then think about your role in that. Were you a hero? Were you a villain? Did you not even show up in the story? Right? That's the kind of exercise that'll force you into that empathy to actually have to see it all the way through and understand, again, what would make it worth to pay for it. If you are not helping your customer get promoted or get a bonus, they are not going to pay you. One of the beauties of building a database of vendors and then saying I want to sell to vendors is I do actually know who all the vendors are. So I know who they are. I don't actually know who the person is. So that's a little bit of a trick. And so, we're always hunting for that and trying to figure out like who's the buyer. Is the buyer a person who's in charge of sales operations? Is it a field officer? A lot of times what we find is that the user, and this is not uncommon in business to business type activity, that the user is not the buyer or not the decision maker. Right. And so that really kind of complicates things because now you got to get somebody to sell for you in the business. In the business to business world, digital marketing is very broken right now. I will just say we did 6 months of emailing, got 0 leads, 0 responses. Everybody's very excited about what AI is going to do for marketing and how it's going to lower costs and you're not going to have to hire marketers anymore. The chatbots are going to write everything and send everything. Nobody thought about what the AI was doing on the receiving end, which is blocking every single one of those things and nothing's getting through. And so we actually find our customers, it's like back to the future. We go to conferences, we go to events, we meet people in person. We have a lot of education to do. So I spend a lot of my time driving around the Chicago suburbs. We sponsored a couple of events through this Illinois Association of School Business Officials. So you find an association, that we're downstate and I drive 6 hours down towards St. Louis to find it. But, that I would say that's part of the veneer of the social media is like, oh yeah, well, you just, you buy this latest SaaS thing and we'll get out there. Nobody is listening as far as I can tell on the other end of those things. And so it is a lot more challenging, I think, than it was say 4 or 5 years ago, just to make contact, right? Just to get people out there. It's actually why we work with the Davidson interns. We write research. We publish content. We keep a presence on LinkedIn. We hope that somebody will go looking for something and find us, or people will find it and pass the article around.
Any other questions from the audience? I've got some more
Nope.
for you. We talked about some of these a little bit, but I'm curious because we were talking, obviously you had almost 20-year career in a corporate environment before you decided to leave. So I have two questions, but the first one is really talk about that transition from having resources, having a team, managing a team, having access to budget, to self-funding and bootstrapping.
Well, it's funny you started with the negative. Let me tell you a little bit about the positive. And for those of you that have spent some time in the corporate world, so we founded Isle and we set up the LLC, and I said, all right, week one, here we go. And I laid out, all the tasks I was going to do in that week, and we got to do this, this, and this. And I said, Scott, that's super aggressive. I don't know if you'll be able to get it done in a week, but let's give it a go. Let's set, bold goals and make it happen. By Tuesday at 3 p.m., I'd done everything. And I was like, whoa. And part of that is because my brain was still wired to my corporate brain. I had no one-on-ones. I had no town halls. I had none of the things that happen in a corporate environment. I just worked. And I was like, oh my God. And as you move up in leadership, like you have to get super efficient at working, because people, whether it's your teammates, your colleagues, the company, customers, reporters, whatever, there's like so much demand on your time. I realized how efficient I got at, like, in the 1 hour of a day, I had to like actually do work. I used to tell my kids all, they'd be like, Dad, what do you do at Morningstar, when they were like 8 years old? I said, well, I go to meetings, I make decisions, and I very rarely do any work. They said, wow, that sounds amazing. I'm like, it's harder than you think. It's harder than you think. It was a lot better when I just did work and didn't have to make any decisions. So that part, you get a lot done, right? The negative is you do all the work, right? So there's no resources, there's no anything. I would be up at night with an audiobook converting PDF data to something we could actually extract. Part of being a data company is, people ask me all the time, where are you going to get the data? I've had that question like 5 times. Like, where do you get the data? You get out your pickaxes and your shovels and you go get the data. That's how you get the data, right? And there's no magic snap your finger. People ask me like, oh, well, can't you get AI to do it? I'm like, you don't think I tried? I tried. You think I want to be up like till 2 a.m, like copying PDFs that are semicolon delineated because somebody just didn't do what they were supposed to do? No. But that is like, when you're building that business, like that's the kind of work it takes. Like there's no magic. So yeah, it'd be great. Part of this is, as we're getting our feet under us and getting revenue and getting more confident, we can start to expand. And, I would recommend start with interns, start with gig hiring. Actually, the person who does a lot of our extraction, we found on Upwork, and they do this as a side hustle, not at a place where I have a full-time data extraction person. That's how you manage.
There we go. We've got about 5 minutes left. Wanted to give it to sort of the final wisdom part. If you can ball all that up. Focus on focus. We got that. Empathy is currency. I'll add mine in there.
There you go.
Revenue is the best source of funding. We got all those things. But what are, for those in the audience that are starting their careers at a career transition point, thinking about starting a business, what would you give them as sort of final advice as we close it out?
So let's step back from just business, but like you're going out into the working world, right? And maybe a few of you are going to start your own companies, but I mean, especially if you want to do business to business, I would advise you go work in a business for a while, because it's really hard for you to understand what's happening inside of a business till you've been in the business. But, in my career, I've been fortunate enough. I ran a lot of training programs. Actually, I ran them for Bank of America. I ran them for Morningstar. I've always had just kind of passion for onboarding, fresh out of college students. And the one thing I just want to share this, that, and it's kind of a negative note, but I'm sorry, but like the number one reason new hires fail, that's it. Like, let's just get right to it. Like, why did we have to fire new employees fresh out of undergrad? The number one reason that they failed, it wasn't because they weren't smart. It wasn't because they weren't hardworking. All of these things were true. It was because they could not find themselves in space. All right. And that has been a huge change in the past 15, 20 years since I started my career. When I started my career at Bank of America, we had a 6-week training program. The bank invested tons, flew us in from all over the place, trained us up. We got to learn, do the job, understand what it meant to be a professional. And those, for all the reasons, I think you would be very hard pressed to find that type of training. Did you ever have that type of?
I did actually at McMaster-Carr. It was a 3-year program.
Oh, there you go. Well, there you go. MasterCard, right?
McMaster-Carr.
Oh, McMaster-Carr, yeah.
Industrial supply distribution.
Oh, yeah. They're actually
on the west side of Chicago.
They're a client. But if you don't find those, like what you find is that the 3 to 5 year employee doesn't want structure, right? They know how to do their job. They're floating around. They're not getting trained to be managers, right? And so you get dropped into this place and you're not getting trained, and you can't figure out what you're supposed to do. And the new hires that struggle with that, their ability to find themselves in space. And I'd say the other big change, and this is me editorializing, is that you are ensconced in so much structure here. And I've been wandering around the campus today, like I see the structure everywhere. Like there is a lot of structure for you folks. There's lots of people here to help you and guide you and make sure that you succeed. And in general, when you go out into the working world, none of that will be there, right? And if you get lucky, you get a boss who's going to really, take a shine to you, but that boss probably hasn't been trained, probably has their own work to do. There's a lot of player coaching that happens in the world today. And so, I'd just say, like, my biggest advice for you as you get out into your careers is find yourself in space, build that structure, figure it out, right? You can't be at your boss's desk every 2 minutes saying, what do I do now? What do I do now? But you have to build that around you. And when we've had new hires fail, again, it wasn't because they weren't smart. It wasn't because they didn't want to do the work. Like that is just this myth that like exists that people want to blame. They don't want to blame themselves that they're not managing and they're not creating structure and they're not helping, people succeed. And it's a two-way street. You're the employee, you're getting a paycheck now, right? Like here you pay, so you should expect some help. There you get paid. You're there to help, right? So sorry on a negative note.
No.
But I do hope that keeps any of you from getting fired. So that's fine.
Find yourself in space. Okay.
Find yourself in space.
On that note, we will wrap up for this evening. That was very fun. Thank you for joining us, Scott.
Thanks for having me. Thank you, everybody.